The Search Podcast USA Edition series is sponsored by PGC. PGC are the longest serving employer of record in North America and can compliantly engage contractors across both the US and Canada on behalf of staffing and recruitment businesses. Our turnkey solution offers a unique access point to the largest staffing market in the world. To find out more, visit us at pgcgroup.com.
Hi everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Search Podcast. I'm Elliott Manning, Managing Director of Kayman Recruitment UK and US. This episode is very special. I've got a guest who I know extremely well, but has been through the same journey as a lot of the people that have been on the podcast across different episodes. I'll let you take away with an introduction.
Absolutely. So my name is Noémie. I've been working at Kayman Recruitment for about a year and a half now, and I'm heading the US function and recruitment practice. I've relocated to the States about 2 months ago. So now I'm currently based in Austin, Texas, and heading a team of 5 people here.
Nice, amazing. So look, Noémie, I've obviously explained to you before the podcast that, you know, the whole purpose of this series is all about the US itself. Not just the market and the way that the industry and I suppose the recruitment staffing space works over there, but also your journey to the States and how you found the visa process. A lot of people always wondering about that. And because you went over there on an L1 visa, which is not traditional as opposed to much like the E2, can you sum that up?
Yeah, of course. So as a French citizen working for a British entity, I was not necessarily eligible for an E2 visa route, which is what most British citizens will have access to whilst relocating to the States. So the L1 is a little bit different. In order to become eligible, I had obviously to stay with you guys in the UK, for about 12 months before we could look at applying for it. Once we applied for the visa, it was a pretty smooth process. It was a long time in the making, so it seemed a little bit long to me, but obviously from the time we've applied, which I think was mid-February, and the time I relocated, there was about 3 months that kind of passed. So I got here mid-May, if I'm not mistaken. Now, obviously, the amount of paperwork that we had to go through in order to unlock that was quite heavy, but I'm sure it's the same for every other visa process.
Yeah, I mean, look, ultimately, like doing the visa process and getting the documentation in place, it's all detail orientated, you know. And one word of advice that me and Noémie went through with the lawyers was the fact that we had to double and triple check everything that they put across. And there's been so many instances where recruiters have gone through the process, and I've known a few that have been rejected purely based on, you know, certain information that's been given. So we were fully aware of that, and, you know, due to just looking at the detail side of it, make sure it was what it was supposed to be. You were in a transitional period, right? So you spent some time in Barbados waiting it out, hard life, you know, living on the beach for a few months, just kind of while the process was underway. But can you explain to the audience about like the rules around you're not allowed in the US, you are allowed in the US? You know, we had a trip to the US last year to New York, but we were so conscious of the time in the States that comes off of your 12 months.
Absolutely. So ultimately, every time, so since the moment I started at Kayman to the moment I actually relocated, I had to declare every time I was going to the US. And every time I would go, that time would be deducted to the kind of like that 12-month time frame. I had to stay with the business in the UK. So altogether last year, I think I only spent like 15 days in the US, and that was kind of like taken off of those 12 months. So I had to wait 2 more weeks before applying.
So that basically meant, to jump in there, like, you know, so where you started on the 1st of Jan and expected to apply on the 1st of Jan the following year, you basically had to do it in the middle of Jan just to kind of clear that period that you spent in the States itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, so ultimately I couldn't, like the times, you know, the time zone, because I've got people on the East Coast, people Central time zone as well. So kind of like time difference between the UK and the US at that time was quite tricky to manage sometimes. After a year working US hours, it was just easier for me to relocate to Barbados whilst waiting out for that visa, because it meant that the time difference was 1 to 2 hours between the two. So it was much easier for me to manage the team and be present for them. Because ultimately in the UK, I would go to bed at like 10:30 or 11 and they're still working. So if there's an emergency or if there's something happening, no one was there to catch it. So Barbados made sense at the time. And obviously from the time we applied for my visa mid-February, I was completely forbidden to go to the States. Like they wouldn't have let me in, and it could have created some issues from the lawyer's perspective and all of the process that was going on. So that was
a great idea. And look, as much as it's a nice place to be, etc., you know, it worked well for you from a time difference perspective whilst you were kind of in transition, and it allowed you to be in the same time difference and work closely with the team, you know, just being around them. So totally get that. And your experience of working the US market from the UK, yes, you was, you know, working, you know, the long hours and putting the time and efforts in, but you obviously saw some, you know, enormous, you know, rewards out of it financially at the same time, which was great. For those recruiters that are working the US market from the UK and then going over to the US and adapting to it, you know, there are any challenges that you experienced, and, you know, trying to get used to the whole concept of not touching the UK and balancing it?
I think where like the best advice I can give is if you're in the UK and you're starting to work the US market with views to relocate over there to the US, the most important thing is to really build out that network prior to going. Something that I really identified when I started doing pure US versus UK and US as a split is that my network was nowhere near as good in the US as it was in the UK. So where it would be fairly easy for me to make a few phone calls and make a few deals out of it in the UK, in the US, it took me a considerable amount of time to do the same thing, simply because I hadn't thought about really building out that market with that network with the same diligence I would have in the UK. So really living up to that 100 connections a week, making sure that I kind of like spread myself across all activities to put my name out there, my presence, and really build that network is what, you know, this year has really kind of like changed the game. Whereas last year when I was in the UK doing both UK, US, and my time being split between, what I found was I wasn't making as much deals in the US. Now that I'm fully here and fully working the US market and I've built that network, it's becoming much easier to make that same amount of money. And obviously the US market being so much more lucrative, the fees are higher, the notice periods are shorter, there's a lot of movement, there's a lot of people always open to having a chat and open to opportunities. The time to deal ratio has become much better.
And is it fair to say that when you got to the States and you were settling into the role itself fully in the US, you know, there was a bit of, it was quite overwhelming, right? You know, how big the market is, how, you know, enormous the network could be or needs to be basically to make it happen. Obviously, when you're focused on London's a much smaller place and is a bubble that you can easily kind of maneuver, but when you're in the US, it's a whole different world.
100%, because, and something that I'm sure most recruitment agencies are going through when they expand to the US is that you can be based in New York but recruit for LA, Houston, Austin, Chicago, Boston, all of these different cities. Whereas in London, you're really growing your network in one, because London is the nest of recruitment in the world. That's where the best recruiters are, the best agencies. That's where the most people in recruitment are concentrated.
The American listening to this might not agree with that, but it was a nice debate.
But yeah, it's much easier to develop a network, a presence, and a name in London, which is, as you said, a much smaller bubble. Here in the US, you know, we're recruiting in New York, we're recruiting a lot in Austin, in Charlotte nowadays. We've got a few roles in Boston, in LA. So therefore, we've got to approach each company and each role completely differently, with a different strategy, with a different mindset, and we've got to be 100% clear as of what we want to get out of that partnership. Whereas in London, it's just everything is quicker, everything is ultra concentrated in one place. So it's indeed extremely different.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of recruiters, and you speak to them obviously as well yourself, you know, they don't realize that as much as they may be a great recruiter in London, doesn't mean that they can add any value other than pretty much just their experience and their skill set to a business in the US, because they're going over there having to literally start again. And they, you know, that's kind of, again, what you've technically experienced, you know, going over there and having to rebuild and having the patience to do that, which you don't have much patience, but we got there. But look, you know, it's just due to the eagerness that you have to do really well. So those that have settled, and let's just talk about Austin. Obviously, that's just where you are. I visited, obviously, you know, to meet you and Colton out there. The culture there is, in my opinion, like phenomenal. But you describe Austin. Those interested in Texas as Austin as a market, what's it like living there now?
It's I don't know how to explain it. It's incredible. First of all, as a kind of like place in the States, most people are used to New York or LA, like bigger cities. Austin is, you can easily walk throughout the whole downtown area. You can scooter everywhere. You don't necessarily have to, like, if you own a car, it's probably easier to go around. But the culture here is extremely friendly. People are very approachable. People are always down to help. People say hi in the streets. You know, from London or Paris, I had never experienced that in a while, so it was really nice. The food scene is incredible, the tech scene even more. There's 100,000 startups and more popping up every year, so there's a big hub here. The expat community is absolutely massive as well, relocating from all across the US, from the UK, from Europe. There's really a vibe here that I like a lot. Obviously, we've got the river and the lakes, you know, crossing the entire city, which is amazing. It's also very green. I didn't expect it of Texas, but it's very naturey. There's a lot of hiking trails, a lot of country concerts, like a lot of things that we don't really have
all on your doorstep as well.
Sorry?
All on your doorstep as well.
Yes. Yeah. I've literally, I don't have a Texas driving license yet, so I can't really drive. So at the moment I'm just walking everywhere and scootering everywhere, and it's just absolutely delightful.
Amazing. In terms of like challenges that you faced upon, you know, your move there, is there anything that you would advise others to be aware of and look out for that you may have come across, whether it's something as simple as banking or, you know, getting ID and just stuff like that to be able to do things?
Absolutely. So I was lucky enough to have someone here that could that is from Austin and could kind of like help me with all of that and make sure that everything was pretty much settled by the time I got here. But first of all, opening a bank account. It's a little bit like in the UK when you first get there, you've got to open a bank account and you've got to find a flat, but one doesn't really work without the other. So the bank wants an address, the building wants a bank account. So it's a little bit of a back and forth in order to find a way. So what I ended up doing is I managed to find a building complex that ultimately allowed me to pay my first few months rent from a UK bank account. And then I run to the bank and set up an account. All you need in order to set up an account is a proof of address. Funny enough, a lease doesn't work. So your workplace will have to put a paper together outlining where you live and kind of like vouching for you to some extent, not as a guarantor, but just as, you know, kind of like official paper coming from your company. And then you'll just need an ID and you can open your bank account. Once these two have been set up, I would highly advise going to get either an ID or a driving license from the state that you're in, because a lot of entities, if you want to set up a phone, if you want to set up your bills, a lot of them will require an ID from the state, and it will eventually make your life easier. So that's also something that you can take an appointment to. I'm sure a lot of people have heard about the famous DMV, which is a little bit of anarchy, but in the end you can just take an appointment, you go there on the day and date, it's going to take an hour and a half, and you're out of there with your paperwork. So it's definitely worth doing that.
Excellent. Really insightful for those that are interested in that. And obviously, you know as well as I do that there's a lot of people trying to explore the Austin market and understand a bit more about it. And people don't realize how, incredible it can be. And they're attracted more to the obvious of New York's, LA's, etc., and Miami's. But Austin is a great place, not just because people are going over there and everyone hears about the hype of Austin being, great financially to be in, from a tax perspective, but also just the place to live in itself is great. And
1000%.
Really enjoyable. It was very similar to being in Charlotte as a place in itself, but just a lot busier in my opinion. Okay, fine. And in terms of recruitment businesses going over there, just to give them some understanding, since you've been dealing with it a lot more, is there any advice you would give to a recruitment business owner that's looking to hire in Austin that they can see value in, and anything you've identified with like differences of recruiters over there that they can, be aware of?
Absolutely. So first of all, in terms of market, Austin is a huge tech hub. The number of startups and tech companies here, or even the larger entities and corporations like Apple, Google, Amazon, all of them, they have big offices here in Austin. So from a tech scene perspective, the opportunity is endless. We have a huge demand for senior business developers in the recruitment side of things, because there's just so much to do that a regular 360 recruiter is going to struggle to kind of do both at the same time, given the market size here and the market share that a tech recruitment agency can take. So huge tech hub, and definitely a really good kind of like place to headquarter US office at the moment. The candidate pool is quite large as well. Not as large as New York, I would say, but definitely larger than a Charlotte or a Raleigh. Getting much bigger than I expected, to be completely honest. It's probably going to rival with LA very soon. But the prices are much better. As you said, from a tax perspective, there's no income tax here, so obviously it's much more beneficial. Life is becoming more and more expensive, however, so the salaries are going up quite massively compared to what it used to be. We are slowly creeping up towards New York prices in terms of salary, but obviously with what's happening, inflation, everything, people here will tell you that year on year everything is becoming more expensive. Gas is ridiculously expensive here, so that's why it's even better to walk or scooter. But it's also a very big renewable energy market. Texas, between Houston, Dallas, and Austin, it's a really good place for renewable energy recruiters and companies to come and have a look. Engineering and construction, it's huge, if you just if you just walk downtown in Austin, like there's buildings popping up everywhere.
There was 5 I counted outside the hotel I stayed in. I walked out of there and there was 5 large buildings being built around me. Different businesses and companies were doing it. It was mental.
Yeah, 100%. So these are huge markets. Like there's a huge opportunity for an ambitious recruitment agency who doesn't necessarily have the size or the means to set up in New York, who doesn't want to pay $6,000-7,000 worth of rent on a monthly basis, but wants to settle in a place where there's a huge market share to be taken, lots of opportunities, a good candidate pool, and just maybe slightly more reasonable prices in terms of base salary as well. Especially British firms coming over to the US to set up a US entity. What I've found from the US firms that I had heard from here is that the commission structure they are on is fairly low compared to what we've got in the UK. So all of these British firms that will then mirror their commission structure from the UK to the US have a huge edge compared to a lot of firms that most people would go to.
Yeah, just have a look at these. I mean, we can help with structures, and we're about to put out a market update that we're going to work on to give people an idea on what's going on out there. But yeah, British firms have got a massive upper hand on not just the fact that they're a lot more generous with commissions, for example, and salary packages, but the benefits, the way that they operate, and the training provided, and a culture I think is also really attractive to recruiters that have not been in that kind of environment before. Noémie, thank you so much for your time. I'll let you get on with it because you need to get back to work as well, I'm sure. But no, look, I appreciate your insight. I've wanted you to be on this for a while now. I just wanted to make sure that you were settled and, you know, comfortable with, you know, telling us more information, I guess, at this point. The US market is hot. There's so much going on there constantly. And for those listening in, you know, I know that in some areas of recruitment, there's challenges right now in certain industries, and firms aren't doing as well as they might want to be against their budgets, etc. And, you know, we know about it. We've seen and heard about it multiple times. However, the US market seems to be very solid, secure, and there's constant opportunity. You got to remember, right? If London is not doing as well as it should be, think about doing, you know, looking at that as being in New York. And if New York's not doing well, that's okay. You just go over to Austin. And if Austin's on a, you know, a position where they're, you know, going a bit downhill, then you go to LA. And if LA, and so you've got multiple chances and areas that you can keep leaping onto if you need to in the same country.
Absolutely, especially with the remote flexibility that we're seeing on the market at the moment, it becomes very easy to find a rainmaker in another city that can kind of really benefit the business and get that revenue generation up.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, that's a wrap. Thank you so much again for your time. And you know, anyone's got any questions, feel free to reach out to myself and Noémie and ask us whatever you need. All links will be posted out on the podcast channels for socials. But thanks, and we'll speak to you soon.
Thank you.